What if Virgo's biggest secret has never been perfection, but pain? What if the real connection between Virgo and the moon isn't about being neat, organized, or overly critical at all, but about something much deeper, a quiet emotional world that learned very early how to survive by staying useful? Because that is the part most people never talk about. They see Virgo as the fixer, the analyzer, the one who notices every flaw in the room. But they don't see what's happening underneath. They don't see the tenderness hiding behind the control. They don't see the fear hiding behind the discipline. And they definitely don't see how deeply the moon changes everything. Because the moment the moon touches Virgo energy, this sign becomes one of the most emotionally misunderstood forces in astrology. Virgo is usually described in simple ways: practical, intelligent, precise, responsible, detail-oriented. The sign that catches mistakes before anyone else notices them. The sign that works quietly, loves quietly, suffers quietly. And yes, all of that is true. But none of those words fully explain why Virgo feels the way it does. None of them explain why this sign can seem so calm on the outside, while carrying a storm of private emotion inside. And that's where the moon enters the story. In astrology, the moon rules the inner self. It rules emotions, instincts, private needs, comfort, vulnerability, and the way we respond when life hurts. It shows what makes us feel safe, what wounds us most deeply, and what we do when no one is watching. So when we talk about Virgo and the moon, we are no longer talking about image. We are talking about the hidden emotional machinery underneath the image. We are talking about what Virgo is really like in the dark, in silence, in love, in heartbreak, in fear, in longing. And the answer is far more emotional than most people expect. Virgo does not usually feel in loud ways. Virgo feels in careful ways, in measured ways, in quiet ways that don't always look emotional from the outside. This is the kind of energy that may not cry in front of a crowd, but will stay awake all night thinking about one sentence you said 3 days ago. This is the kind of energy that may not say, "I love you" in grand dramatic speeches, but will remember your routines, your stress patterns, your favorite comfort food, the tone of your voice when something is wrong. Virgo's emotional language is often built through attention, through care, through observation, through action, and that is the first emotional twist that makes this connection so powerful. Virgo often loves through service because service feels safer than exposure. Doing something helpful feels easier than saying something raw. Fixing your problems feels easier than admitting how deeply they care. And if you miss that, you miss one of the most loyal emotional signatures in the Zodiac. But this is where things get complicated. Because the moon is not neat. The moon is not orderly. The moon is fluid, shifting, irrational, hungry, soft, wounded, nostalgic, unpredictable. The moon doesn't move in straight lines. Virgo wants to understand emotion. The moon wants to be felt. Virgo wants clarity. The moon often brings mess. And that tension creates one of the most fascinating emotional struggles in astrology. Virgo often responds to emotion by analyzing it. Instead of simply feeling hurt, Virgo asks why. Instead of simply feeling anxious, Virgo looks for the source. Instead of simply melting into love, Virgo studies it, tests it, questions it, tries to understand whether it is stable, safe, and real. On one level, this makes Virgo emotionally intelligent. On another, it can make Virgo emotionally exhausted. Because not every feeling can be solved like a puzzle. Not every ache can be organized into something neat and manageable. Some emotions do not want answers. They want space. And Virgo does not always know how to give itself that space. That's the hidden ache at the center of Virgo's bond with the moon. This is a sign that often tries to earn peace instead of receive it. A sign that may feel safest when being productive, useful, prepared, and in control. A sign that may quietly believe that if everything is handled correctly, then nothing painful can break through. But life does not work that way. Feelings do not ask permission. Grief does not care how organized you are. Fear does not disappear just because the house is clean and the schedule is full. And when those feelings rise anyway, Virgo can become its own harshest judge. This is where the emotional tide turns darker. Because the same precision that makes Virgo so capable can turn inward. The same eye that sees what needs improvement in the outside world can start dissecting the self. Virgo may begin to monitor its own emotions with impossible standards. Why am I still upset? Why am I not over this yet? Why can't I just move on? Why do I feel so messy inside? And without even realizing it, Virgo can start treating emotion like failure. That is one of the moon's deepest lessons for Virgo. Your feelings are not mistakes. And for some Virgos, that lesson takes years to learn. Because underneath the competence, underneath the discipline, underneath the calm voice and the careful routines, there is often someone who feels responsible for more than they should. Someone who notices everything. Someone who senses tension before anyone else admits it. Someone who often becomes the emotional support system in the room, not because they are never overwhelmed, but because they don't trust chaos. They trust solutions. They trust preparation. They trust usefulness. Now here comes the part that changes everything. The connection between Virgo and the moon reveals that Virgo's deepest emotional need is not praise. It is safety. And safety, for Virgo, often comes through order, reliability, and meaning. Virgo needs to feel that life makes sense, that people mean what they say, that effort matters, that loyalty is real, that care is mutual, that there is some structure holding the emotional world together. And when that structure breaks, Virgo feels it more deeply than people realize. That is why betrayal hits Virgo so hard. Not just because it hurts, but because it destroys trust in the pattern. It creates disorder inside a sign that survives through emotional structure. It tells Virgo that all their effort, all their reading between the lines, all their attempts to prevent damage were not enough. And that can cut deeper than almost anything. But love can heal this energy in equally powerful ways. When Virgo feels emotionally safe, this sign becomes extraordinary. Not flashy, not chaotic, extraordinary. Virgo becomes one of the most devoted, thoughtful, healing presences a person can have in their life. This is the kind of love that watches carefully and responds precisely. The kind of love that protects your peace in ways you may not even notice at first. The kind of love that brings order to your chaos without making you feel ashamed for having it. Virgo nurtures through small details, and those details become sacred because they are never random. They are chosen. They are noticed. They are remembered. That's what makes Virgo's relationship with the moon so beautiful. It proves that emotional depth does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like consistency. Sometimes it looks like someone quietly showing up again and again, adjusting, helping, holding things together, making life gentler in invisible ways. Sometimes it looks like practical devotion so steady that people underestimate how much feeling it contains. But there is still a shadow here, and it matters. Virgo can become trapped in the idea that love must be useful, that worth must be earned, that rest has to be deserved, that emotion must be justified before it is expressed. And when that happens, Virgo begins to withhold softness from the one person who needs it most, themselves. They offer patience to others, but pressure to themselves, grace to others, but criticism to themselves, understanding to others, but relentless standards to themselves. And the moon keeps returning with the same question. When will you stop trying to be worthy of care and finally allow yourself to receive it? That is the breakthrough. That is the emotional climax hidden inside Virgo's story. Because Virgo is not here to become less caring, less thoughtful, or less precise. Virgo is here to learn that tenderness does not weaken those gifts. It deepens them. Virgo becomes strongest not when feeling disappears, but when feeling no longer has to hide behind perfection. When love no longer has to disguise itself as usefulness. When pain no longer has to be edited into something efficient. When the heart is finally allowed to be human. This becomes especially intense for people with a Virgo moon in their birth chart. A Virgo moon often creates someone who is highly observant, deeply sensitive, and quietly self-controlled. These people may come across as composed, but inside, they are tracking everything. Every shift in energy, every inconsistency, every emotional detail. They often know when something is wrong before anyone says a word. They may love through support, through problem solving, through helping, through care that looks practical but feels deeply intimate. They often don't want to burden others with their feelings, so they become experts at carrying more than anyone realizes. And yet, even they cannot outrun the moon forever. Sooner or later, life creates a moment that cannot be fixed, a loss that cannot be planned around, a heartbreak that cannot be improved, a season of confusion that does not respond to logic. And when that moment comes, Virgo faces its greatest emotional transformation. Not the transformation of becoming louder or more dramatic, but of becoming softer, more honest, more forgiving, more willing to sit inside a feeling without turning it into a problem to solve. That is where Virgo begins to heal at the deepest level, not by abandoning structure, but by no longer worshiping it, not by rejecting responsibility, but by understanding that responsibility does not mean carrying everything alone, not by becoming careless, but by realizing that imperfection is not danger. Sometimes the most powerful thing Virgo can do is nothing at all, except admit that something hurts, that something matters, that something inside still needs gentleness. And that is exactly why the moon reveals the truth about Virgo better than almost anything else in astrology. It shows us that Virgo was never cold. Virgo was careful. It shows us that Virgo was never emotionless. Virgo was simply translating emotion into action because action felt safer than exposure. It shows us that Virgo's perfectionism often begins as protection, that its criticism often begins as fear, that its devotion often runs so deep it becomes invisible, and that behind all the strength, there is often a heart that wants what every heart wants, to feel safe enough to stop bracing. So the next time someone calls Virgo too critical, too guarded, too controlling, or too hard to read, look deeper. There may be a person standing there whose inner world is built on fragile, beautiful effort. A person who has learned to create emotional safety one detail at a time. A person who loves with discipline because they fear what happens when life falls apart. A person whose connection to the moon makes them far softer than they seem, and far more vulnerable than they will ever casually admit. That is the hidden bond between Virgo and the moon. Not perfection, but protection. Not coldness, but controlled tenderness. Not distance, but devotion that rarely knows how to ask for anything in return. And once you understand that, Virgo stops looking like the sign that only notices flaws. It becomes the sign that notices everything, including the things that are breaking silently inside the people it loves. And maybe that is Virgo's real magic. To care so deeply that love becomes detail. To feel so much that silence becomes language. To hold so much together that people forget there is a heart inside the one doing all the holding. If this changed the way you see Virgo, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more astrology stories that reveal the emotional truth hidden beneath the surface.